All right, thank you, everybody. So I'm going to go through this reasonably quickly. There's a lot of stuff, and this is sort of I want to start out by saying we're going to show you a lot of stuff around Datadog, but it's really just going to be highlights. Datadog is a deep and comprehensive system, and we just literally don't have time to show you everything. So we sort of took a couple of things that happened recently, some of the stuff that we think is going to be the most impactful, and we're going to give you just a really Reader's Digest version of that for those of you who know that reference. Beyond that, really what you're going to need to do is dig in on your own. We have a wealth of information in Confluence. There's a link that'll be shared along with a handful of other links to the Confluence space that the observability team manages. They've got videos there. They've got a lot of documentations around best practice, things like that. Of course, you can always ask in any of the SRE general channel or anywhere really. Purpose of the training is really just to get you started, maybe show you a few areas you haven't been aware of potentially, give you a foundation upon which you can grow. Datadog and feature improvements and tools as we investigate and implement will basically help you understand and tune your services. So let me get through this. Okay, so we start out with SSO. Everybody should already know this, but you can go to SSO, click on the Datadog tile, and open it up. So what I'm going to start with here is I know most people on here are developers, and most of your focus is going to be around APM, RUM, things like that. I'm going to start more basic than that at more of an infrastructure level, and hopefully you'll see why here in a second. So for those who don't know, we had a bit of an incident last week on Friday around one of our databases. There was a change in the pattern of traffic going to it, and it caused it to slow down for a couple hours. We had intermittent. It turned out to be about 20% failures in the calls going to the database. What I'm going to do is walk you through sort of some of the stuff that we investigated as part of that. So it's more of a real world scenario. So here's the infrastructure page. Again, this link will be shared as well. And what you can do is click on infrastructure list and go to, in this case, it was the auth service Postgres database. I'm just going to look for auth. Is that right? Auth service Postgres. This is going to be live. I didn't try and record any of this stuff because I want to be able to, do this interactively with all of you and answer any questions you have. So here we see the auth service Postgres instance. If we click on that, we see a pretty basic idea of CPU usage. You can click on these things, and instead of CPU, I can click on swap or disk usage or whatever. You can also click down here. I'm going to click on system first and view the metrics, and it shows you kind of a quick version, a quick list, a graph of all of the different metrics that it's capturing for this, at least the ones that we are actually capturing. Some of these there's just no data for it, so it doesn't show up. This is meant mostly to show you sort of what the total number of things that are being grabbed by Datadog for each instance and each service and all that really are. So in this case, I wanted to actually show you, and I'll go into this later on, a notebook. Notebooks are what I end up using for investigative and debug purposes to consolidate all of the stuff that looks interesting and relevant for a particular incident into one place so that we can correlate and understand if something is causative, if it's correlative, or whatever. So one of the things, actually, no, I'm not going to be able to see that. Let me shift this to open in dashboard so you can actually see a wider range of things. And here, okay, so here we just clicked on open in dashboard, and we see over the last week, we see this nasty spike here in CPU usage by process or overall CPU usage. So I'm going to start by showing you something that some of you may not know about. You can click on this little thing right here, whatever it is, the box with the arrow up, and click on Save to Notebook. I'm going to do that now, and just click on a new notebook. There we go. And then I'm going to open up that new notebook for future reference. Okay, load average is another one. So I'm going to click on that and save to the same notebook, which is now just named after the time that it is. There we go. And quickly, I'll go over here and you can see now those two graphs are there. I'll get more into that in a little bit, but just wanted to get started. Okay, so let us go back to here. I also wanted to click on Postgres and view metrics to show you that it's not just system level metrics, it's some service level metrics here as well. These are collected by integrations that are attached to these specific types of services. So this is Postgres, so it's a Postgres integration. I'll show you that in a little bit, but you can see there's a lot of interesting graphs here potentially as well. You can also, again, you can click on this Postgres dashboard, looking over the last week, and we see some interesting spikes. So I'm going to grab that one as well and save to the notebook. Again, that same notebook. All right. Okay, so now let me go to this notebook again. And first thing I'm going to do, because the name of it is obviously not particularly interesting, I'm going to rename it to something that is interesting. So also, this is a notebook that all of you, if you wanted to follow along, you can actually open it up in your own browsers and poke around on it. Sorry, looking at my notes now. Let's see. All right, yeah. Okay, and one more graph I wanted to grab here. Here we go. Insert subspace and deletes per second. So that's another interesting one I want to grab. And now we can see that that name has been updated. Okay. Like I said, the notebook is sort of the key place that I use for investigative purposes. And your mileage may vary. It's really up to you. But a couple things I wanted to point out here. One, notice at the top that it says past hour. This has tripped me up a couple times, and I know it's tripped others up as well. Notice that it says past in 1 hour, but here it says past 7 days. This is one thing that's a little irritating to me, is that it defaults to going in at whatever the time was you were looking at. So you got to kind of pop it open and click on global time. And now we can see that that graph changes to match whatever you have as the global time. So I'm going to do that really quickly here for everything. And last one. There we go. Okay, so really what we want to do here, and what we want to do in Datadog in a lot of cases, is determine whether something is a correlation or it's causative. So in this case, something happened. We actually, I think we've got a pretty good handle on what happened, but let's pretend we didn't understand it yet. We want to understand, okay, what parts of the changes that have happened over the last whatever time period you're looking at could have caused this. So we can see here when our spike started happening last week, we can zoom in. All I did was drag and drop over that window, that range. We see the CPU usage climb from sort of normal up to 100% CPU. We can see that the load average climbed up to 50. For those who don't know, load average is essentially how long the system is, how many CPUs the system thinks it needs. So what we normally want to look at is what's called normalized load average, which is the number of CPUs that it thinks it needs divided by the number of CPUs it has. In this case, it thinks it needs 50 CPUs, but it actually only had 4 at the time. So normalized load average would be something like whatever that is, 10 plus. Now, this is an interesting one. We can see that the rows fetched, returned, and updated are actually pretty high. One thing I want to show you here is if you highlight this, rows returned is actually the one that matters. So we can go in here and update and get rid of some of the stuff that's irrelevant. Like, we don't really care about rows fetched. There's no real interesting information there. Okay, so now we've just narrowed it down. One more thing I want to show you. I know this is kind of going into some weird detail, but it's just some interesting stuff around how you can play with these graphs to really get the information you need. I want to look at this day over day. Now, there's kind of 2 ways you can do that. There's the painful way, which would be, let's shift this back to a week, and then look at this, and we say, okay, well, how does that look on the 25th, the 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th? Okay, that works. But you can also do some really cool stuff, like add another metric. You can add in that same metric. This is one of those irritants. You might notice that I'm having to type all this stuff in manually. It's one of those things where weirdly Datadog doesn't actually do a good job. There we go. And then this little function button, if you click on that and click on time shift, we can change it to show me that same metric, but from 1 day before. And then what I personally like to do is change it to a dashed line. And then we add one more metric to show it from the week before. And these you can see that they're auto-populating with anything that's matching the text that I'm typing in. Let's change this to a week before. I like to change that to a dotted line. And then I also sometimes like to do this. Call it today, call it yesterday, and call it last week. Okay. Oh yeah, also, there's another one that I keep forgetting. This right here, you have to actually manually update it. So if you get rid of it all, it'll actually just give you whatever the information is. Okay, so now let's zoom in again on that same window of time. And we can see, okay, so last week and yesterday being Thursday in this context, we were right around here for the number of rows returned, but something happened right around 4:15, 4:30, something like that that significantly increased the number of rows being returned by these Postgres queries. So now we have something that looks like it might be causal. And I'm not going to go into it any more in detail, but this is just to show you sort of how quickly you can come to understanding what might be happening in a system. By the way, because this is super awesome and interesting, I will show that the work that the team did today and yesterday and over the last couple of days has not only substantially improved things, but if we notice here, this solid line of the number of rows returned, which are up in 120 million range, is basically down here low enough that you can't even really see it on the graph. It's down to 106,000 rows per second. So it has substantially improved thing. And you can also see up here, CPU is much lower and all that. That's just a kudos to everybody working on that particular problem. Okay, so that's kind of all I'm going to talk about for the notebook right now. Let me go over to, I said integrations are another part of this. This is all still sort of at the resource services level, not at the APM and RUM level. That'll be covered here in just a little bit. But we have integration. So what is an integration? It's basically a collector that's running on the systems that are running this, or running next to the systems that are running this in certain cases, that talk to whatever that service is. So Redis, there is an agent running in Datadog, or a script that's running in Datadog on the system that's running Redis that actually calls Redis and gets a lot of metrics and then exports them to Datadog for us to correlate. RabbitMQ, Postgres. I'm going to click on the Postgres one because that's the one we were just looking at. If you click on this integration box, you can actually go to data collected and see all of the various metrics that we're collecting. And there is a large number. In fact, honestly, half the time when I'm dealing with Datadog, I'm just spending time reading the documentation to say, does this seem like something that's going to be even remotely interesting for this particular purpose? By the way, there is a cheating way. Honestly, I don't even do this most of the time. What I normally do is this: Postgres, Datadog. And then almost always the first hit's going to be the documentation from Datadog. And that actually is, for me, slightly easier if you scroll down. There's that same information. Here are the metrics that are being captured. And here's a pretty good description of what the types of metrics, or what the metrics are, as well as the type of metric, gauge or a counter or something like that. Ooh, okay, so go back here. So you can see there's all sorts of integrations that we have in place. If you find one of your services is using a resource that we're missing, feel free to reach out to the observability team. There are going to be gaps. There are almost always going to be gaps, but we're trying to close them wherever we find them. Yeah, that's about it for that. Okay, so now I told you I was going to be going quickly because there's a lot to cover here. So let me pause for breath here and let me move on to the next one. So service level metrics. So that's going to be over here under APM and services. Again, the links will be shared with you. And I'm going to stick with authorization. So let's switch over to authorization service v3. So again, we type auth at the top. We see all the services. We click on it. And now we have some interesting APM data. So this is the actual calls that are going to the authorization v3 service. So I'm going to do sort of the same thing. I mean, I said we're kind of done with the notebook, and I'm not going to bother with that too much, but it's still going to follow along on this because it's interesting. So I expanded it out to 1 week's range. We can see, oh, look, that latency graph doesn't look very happy. Oh, look, the error graph doesn't look happy. And this is from that same Friday incident. So let's zoom in on this a little bit to see what interesting information we can bring to bear for this particular investigation. Okay, so here we have left to right. It's requests, P50 latency. You can change the latency if you want to go look at P95 or whatever. If you want requests per second, you can do that. Learn to poke around these things and play with it and see what's interesting. But we can see that the vast majority of these are this policy decision requests endpoint, this post REST API v1 policy decision request. We can click on that, and that gives us a narrower view of just that particular call with a couple of interesting things. You can see the request versus error count, that same latency, the same errors, the amount of time spent and where. And then we can see this dependency map, which here, this is a central service, so it is expected that it would be looking something like this. Sometimes dependency maps are just one-to-one, sometimes they're smaller, sometimes they look like this. And then here's a span summary. So it does track, actually, let me pause for a second and explain what a span is. A span is basically a component of a trace, and a trace can be comprised of multiple spans, and the spans could be including, in this case, everything like a Postgres call, Spring Handler call, stuff like that. I'll show you another thing here in a second. Actually, if we click on one of these 200 responses, so a successful one, a span is each one of these things, and the entire trace is the collection of all of them. So I don't know, if you didn't see that, let me do that again. So if you go to the bottom, we can see all these spans from the retention filter. I'll talk about that briefly in just a second. But to make my life easier, I'm going to click on open in full page, because you can see right now, this is just a windowed page. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, I mentioned the latency graph. By the way, you can also click on another way to see which one of those you're looking at. Oh, yeah, and that's right. I wanted to also grab this and throw it into that notebook. There we go. Okay, so now I'm just going to grab one 200 response here to see what a successful quote unquote response is. And remember, this is largely from the window of time yesterday where this was having problems. So one of the things that should stand out to you is that this whole process, this whole query took around 650 milliseconds to finish. That's a huge red flag for most things. It should not have been taking that long. Obviously, it shows that there's something unhealthy, and we can dig in and figure out exactly why. So looking at this flame graph, which is what these are called, we can see most of this stuff was happening fairly quickly. This one is where it really bogs down. So 604 milliseconds for this one specific Postgres query. Let's see what else is interesting here. You can also look at things based on the factors or the facets down here up here on the left. So for example, if I just wanted to look at nothing but errors, I could click on that, and it gives me, oh, look at, there's all the 500 errors that we were getting that day. If we wanted to look at the status code, oh, by the way, you notice I put status in there. That's just because there are a lot of facets that you can index off of. Sometimes they're easy to find, sometimes they're not. So what I normally do is just say, oh, look, I obviously want to index off the status code. Let's just throw that in there, if I can spell it correctly. There we go. All right, so here's all of the 200 responses. Here's all the 400 responses. You get the idea. Also, you can see on the left side here, there's also a counter of all of the types of responses. So there's a wealth of information here is sort of my point. Play around with it. We're just not going to be able to cover it all. Let's see what else. Yeah, sorry. There's one other thing I wanted to show you here really quickly. And that is, let me just look at a 200 response. It's easy to miss this. This one's actually slightly easier. So the flame graph can sometimes show a whole bunch of different parts of that whole trace, trace ID. You got to kind of zoom in with your mouse or whatever to actually see all of the various calls that are happening. Some of them can be really, really narrow slivers that you could easily miss. Here we go. Like there's a couple over there. Look at that. I didn't even see that one going on. Anyway, this is actually where I think most developers spend most of their time is really kind of getting used to looking at these trace IDs. One thing I don't have in my notes, but I want to show you really quickly before I kind of release over to Amar, who's going to start working on or covering some RUM stuff. It is really kind of fun for me, and that may be because I'm weird, and I understand that, to click on APM and traces here. And this does a really cool thing where you can just, if you wait a second, it shows you live all of the traces that are coming through our system. So this is kind of cool because you can see an overall health of the system from a very high level view. In a second, it'll start auto refreshing it. And if you see something weird coming through, there you go. If you see something weird coming through, you can click on it and actually take a deeper dive. So of course, it also happens very quickly. You can click on pause if you need to. So let's see, here we go. Here's something that's taking 87.4 milliseconds. Let's pretend that's 800 milliseconds. I could click on that and actually say, what's going on? Why is that taking so long? You can also filter it out. You know, I can look at specific services. So if you own, let's say, authorization service, you can change it to just include the authorization service. And now we're going to stream it again. And now we're going to see only traces that are related to the authorization service, which are largely these policy decision requests. You'll notice that there's a health one there too. You can filter out things as well. So anyway, this is the basic stuff that is collected by Datadog. I'm going to hand it over to Amar here, who's going to go more into detail on more of the front end stuff and sort of how you connect the dots. So I will stop talking.
Thank you, Brandon. The notebook is very interesting. I always look at your notebooks and many times steal from there, copy the clone the graphs and share, use them and so on. Okay, I'll be covering RUM and APM. So RUM is the Datadog's user monitoring. It's a JavaScript library which runs in the browser in the client context and sends the data directly to Datadog. It can cover the performance of web pages, of mobile applications. We haven't enabled it for mobile yet, but that's hopefully coming soon. It can capture automatically the user actions, the network request. It also captures the console logs, which can be used for the error management. It gives a lot of analytics. You could see things from different point of view, how people are using our app and so on. It can also be used to do a support call, see what happened to a particular user. Besides that, I'll also be showing you, it has a session replay feature, which we have enabled for some subset, and I wanted to show you. So let's start with the support call. So one of our users, Brennan, has been complaining about his session. So let's see what's going on there. So to do that, we are going to go into RUM, just like Brennan was showing for APM and so on. So you go for RUM sessions, and the screen would look very, very similar. Like in other one, you can search for things, you could select the facets and so on. So in here, I'm looking for past 1 day. I'm looking for the sessions. Other things you can see is views, actions, and so on. But I'm in the session view, and I want to find session for Brennan. That can be done by searching by email. So you could also find for any of our customers' session by typing their email. Once you select the email, you have to click on it to get the right kind of words in there. And then you can type the email values, and we see the Brennan's email. Select that, and that shows the sessions in the past 1 day. We see about 2 sessions. Session is roughly Datadog puts things together into this category called session. It kind of times out after a while if the session is not used. So it's not equivalent of a person logging in and logging off, because as you know, in our app, we are logged in and we stay logged in for several days, but it would break it into sessions. When there's no activity, then it'll time out. And then when the activity starts, it creates a new session. So roughly you see the time window. And if there is an indication that user complained about this session, then you can click on it. And then you can see different things in the session. It would automatically capture any view changes. We have a spa, so there's only single view. It'll capture all the clicks. We can also it'll also capture the errors, and we can also do some custom work, custom things. I'll talk about that in a second. So let's click on the view. So when you are in the view, you get a whole bunch of attributes. You could see even more attributes by going. So right now I'm in the performance section by going into the attribute section. So when I look at the attribute, I see that Brennan was using Windows. Browser is Electron, which is typically for our desktop. The SPA version is 159, CARP account number, and user UUID, which is sometimes helpful to do other investigations. We can also see the desktop version. Desktop version is put in our user agent. So here is the user agent details. And we see that Brennan is using a desktop version of 1.12.0. We can also put other attributes if we need to. So like, if there is other things that some people can think that we need to put, we can open tickets and get those in there, like message ID or, you guys know a lot more about what's important. So going back, so we are in the session.
Those attributes that Amar was just showing you, those are all basically facets. So all of those things that he saw there, you can actually index off of in the facets.
Yeah, you can build the queries, you can bring them into the notebooks, all kinds of interesting things. They are just like other APM or metric data. They are very powerful. So we can see that Brennan has joined he has clicked on mute. There's probably somewhere a joining a meeting, the meeting ID, a few errors, which we would look at it separately also to see what comes in here. In the error, they might make sense to the guys to see that why he's getting this loop limit exceeded. One of the interesting thing was that when a phone call comes in, it comes in on the WebSocket. So first, and this is all I just learned in last few days, when the phone call comes in, it comes on the WebSocket, and from the WebSocket, before the call is shown to the user as a ringing icon where they can click, it does a desktop, it gets an RTC session, it does a ringing, and then it puts it on the desktop. And sometimes user were not getting the indication that there was a call and they were missing the calls. And there was a lot of complaint on missing the calls. So the team associated with this work, the person I know is James involved in there, but there were other people. They added custom events. So in this custom event, they added few other custom attributes. So which is an interesting way to see why some of the calls were not popping up. In some cases, it turned out the user had turned the do not disturb and so on. So like, those kinds of things can be added again as custom events. We can see, we could see the timing also when from one call to another, the time went. I think the time was also added to one of the custom events. And you could see if this ended up with an answer call or if the call was picked up on a different device. In some cases, people were picking it up on a different device. They had a desktop app and a actual phone. So whole bunch of things can be done. We are already adding some custom work, custom events. If you see some scenarios which would be helpful to add with the custom events and a few extra things in there, that would be very helpful. By default, RUM automatically picks up the session change and the clicks and so on. But a lot of our interactions are through WebSockets. And if there are a few screens, like for example, we are missing a lot of events on video handling. And that's another area which would be interesting to capture it here and be able to diagnose that. So this was looking at the RUM and some of the custom events. Next thing I wanted to show was a feature of RUM where you can replay a session. Again, we haven't enabled it for all of our apps, but Flow Builder has enabled them. So here are a few ones. Let me see if this one has something interesting. So I'm going to click on it. Looks like it does have some interesting things. So user is clicking, goes, and it's compressed. So you could see it quickly to see how the interaction happened. Again, I just wanted to bring it up and show that it's a capability. I'm not sure how useful would be for troubleshooting purposes, but it's very useful to see if areas of where the customer is struggling with using our application and so on. Next thing, so I showed you the RUM, I showed you the RUM playback. I also told you that RUM captures the errors. So we want to look at the error view and see how the Datadog is dealing with errors. It's already taking an error and grouping them. So this error cannot read properties of undefined versus this error, which is also sounds like cannot read properties of undefined, but has a slightly different text. It has grouped them, and it has given you an idea of how many times this error has happened in the last 1 hour. How is it that spread? If I open it up, you could see over time how this error happened in past 7 days, is which versions of the product it's been affecting. This error started coming very recently. Some of the errors you would see are like 1 year old. It shows you the details. It gives you an idea of the session. You can also view it in the context. What I feel is that this one is a very nice way of looking at all the errors, all the console logs which are showing up in our application in production, and to work on reducing them, to look at them to see if they make sense to be coming up. Now, these, hopefully, majority of these are not affecting users. Maybe few of them are, but we need to find them. They give you an idea of the time. Where it's helpful is if during the development, in QA and in RC and so on, these can be looked at and worked on reducing. If nothing else, it's a noise which kind of affects us in troubleshooting other things. So hopefully other people can take a look at it and see what they make out of it. We are looking at least more than 99 groups of errors. And they keep coming quite a large number of times. Now, these are the errors in the context coming in the browser from the client side. An equivalent screen also exists on the backend side. So I'm in the APM, and I'm going to the error tracking screen. This is showing errors from the backend, what APM is picking up. And on this screen, just like in the previous screen Brendan was showing, you could go into a particular place. So let's look at the authentication service only, focus only on one service. And you could see in 1 hour, this type of error came 392 times. And there's 5 different kinds of errors. You could also go into a different view to look at more details. So clicking on this error is more than a year ago. So it's been seen off and on. We can go into a weekly view and see, and this one was a weekend and a long weekend. And you can see the whole stack trace of this error. And you can also view this error with an APM in the context of like how Brendan was showing the spans and so on. So you could actually see where this error happened. You can go to the full view and see how, I think this error is initiated with I don't know how to get back to that one. You can double click once you get in here to see the details of this particular line. On a big graph like this, where it's spread over several minutes, and it's hard to get back to that place. Where I think this would be useful is, again, trying to reduce these kinds of things before it gets into production, and looking at, but maybe the teams can also look in the production and kind of work through it. So this was another section where I wanted to cover on the errors. Last thing I wanted to cover was what Brennan was showing through, how do you get to APM and look at the services. So I wanted to look at one of the service and look from a performance point of view and see if there's anything interesting we can see from a performance point of view. Again, it may be something which is useful or not, would depend on the owners of that service and technical experts in that service. I was in my earlier part in here in Nextiva involved with the SMS orchestration service. So it's my favorite service to come and take a look at it. So APM services, I just picked a service. We are looking at the same graph which Brennan was showing. It gives you an overview of the service. What here I'm interested in is in two parts. One is P50 latency versus P90 latency. And see if that spread is large, then that's interesting, that why some calls are taking so long versus other not. Sometimes it just happens that different arguments, sometimes there's other interesting stuff, but you could see like this one is 10 times for 14K. So this may be interesting, like, I mean, time is small, it's still 21 milliseconds, but it is, variation is a lot. It may be something to look at. Again, you are the best judge as technical experts in your service to see if this is something to look at. Another thing which I look at is the total time. So this right here is in hours. So its P50 latency is high, 183 millisecond. This one is even higher, 2 seconds. But this one is getting called a lot. So people use sending SMS feature a lot, and MMS, multimedia, that's not as much being used. So let's see, maybe this one is more interesting to see, to optimize if there's anything we can do about this. So to focus on this is another way. You can click on it, and then you could see view, or you could click on the view here, and it'll focus only on one service. Brennan went a different way, but it's the same place. You end up with the one service. And it gives you an idea for that one particular endpoint. It shows you the latency and the requests and version, and it also shows you the map. You could see different things. Where I'm interested in is going into the span. So we can click on a couple of them to see what's going on. So on this call, what I have observed is that this call has two components, the call coming in, and then there's a whole bunch of activities. Right here, the call is finished. We return to the caller, but then there's a whole bunch of activity going on in here. So that's the async part of the activity. Now, in the sync activity, I noticed that some of them are in error. Sometimes they are not, but there are also the errors. You could see the errors in here. So the sending SMS involves talking to a phone number service, phone number orchestration service, which ends up talking to phone number service. There's another call to phone number orchestration service. So each call in the phone number orchestration service also has to authorize and authenticate. So this call going on in here, and then there's another call. So this is taking 194 milliseconds. This is taking 131 milliseconds, right? Now, my knee-jerk reaction, can these two be combined? And I know that probably architecturally they are unique and so on, but there is a whole lot of wasted duplicate work, which if this call and this timing need to be improved, that may be one thing. So, combining calls, adding caching layer, whatever things you find to see if you need to focus on improving the timing and so on. So I just wanted to show how APM, for the APM for Java service, we didn't write even a single line of code. And all of that coming in and being available gives so much insights that we could use this to improve our services. And same thing with our error analysis and so on. That's all I wanted to talk about it today for now. So Brennan, over to you.
One more thing, if you could cover it really quickly. And we got 15 minutes, so probably this is going to be close to the end. We can take questions, but can you show the link from RUM to APM? Show the little icon you can click on to actually go from one to the other.
Okay, perfect. So some calls are originating from the user sessions, and other calls are not originating from user sessions. So let's see. So I'm going to show you from RUM to APM. So if I take any user session.
I don't think we have it enabled for everybody yet. You might want to look at the one that you have open for me right now. So this is something that we turned on for the Nextiva tenant last week, and then we're working on getting it turned on for everybody starting later today, I think.
Yes, I have a CR open for today evening.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you for catching that, Brennan.
Yeah, no worries.
So I really needed to pick a user in the Nextiva tenant.
Right.
This particular view didn't have a lot of events, so it's not interesting. Let me look at another view. So the view loading takes lots of calls, and this symbol right here indicates that there is an associated APM available. You can also search like everything else. So you could say focus on messages, and it'll show. And this call is to conversation API. And this call is also to conversation. So when I click on it, wherever this icon is, so we are in the RUM view, and from RUM, we end up in the APM. And the other call we were looking at APM. And most likely, we did not see an option to go back to RUM because we have not enabled that feature for the that corporate account number. So once you're in a RUM view, you can go to APM. You can view APM in a full window if you like. You can also see all the calls for that session to the backend service. So there's a lot of calls in here. It'll show all the APM calls we made, or Brennan made when in that session. Once you are in APM, you're looking at APM like, you started from APM services or whatnot. And if the request goes to the browser at the top level, you see a browser request, then you know that this call, whatever the call you were looking at, like in this case for a conversation API, or maybe even lower level, this call originated from the RUM session, and you can go back to see the call in the RUM. So from APM, you can go back to RUM, or from RUM, you can go to APM. So you're able to go back and forth between the two.
Yep.
Did I miss anything else?
No, I think that's it. I mean, there's a ton more. So we only have like 12 minutes left here. Wanted to open up for any questions. There's more we actually had on our list to talk about. There's funnel analysis, which is something I've just started looking at recently that might be interesting. Sort of the idea behind that is, if I ask myself a question, how many times does somebody go from getting a new RTC session, which is something you saw earlier when Amar was showing you the RUM session, through to an inbound call ringing? So this is a relevant business question. How many times does somebody successfully get a call and actually get an audible call or get a desktop? And there's funnel analysis that I'm not going to take you through because we don't have time, honestly, that'll actually show you, and I did this yesterday, 98% of the time it actually made it through to a call. 2% of the time it didn't. So what would be interesting is to look at that 2% of the time and figure out why not. And of course, with everything in Datadog, you can click on that 2% and it'll open up literally the sessions where it failed. So you can look at each one of them or look at them in series. Anyway, there's a lot more. So what questions does the team have? Either come in and speak or chat it in the text or text it in the chat. What questions do you guys have? Have you considered adding Datadog browser logs SDK to our logger so that we can link logs with RUM session? Yes, it's actually in progress. Amar, you want to talk about that? Yeah.
Sure. So the way APM is a standard word now, not just the Datadog. These things work is by building a trace ID. So trace ID is a number. So when the top level call is made, it sends the trace ID to Datadog, as well as this trace ID is passed from one service to another. If the service is HTTP based, then it sends us HTTP header. If the service is Kafka, then it's added a header as a Kafka. And there's a lot of standardization going on what the name of the header is, but regardless, there is a trace ID and there's a format like a number. So typically trace ID is a huge number. So this trace ID can also be put into logs. Datadog automatically injects the trace ID into Log4j. So for Java applications, we would get it for almost for free. I have enabled that feature. It's a environment variable in the Java startup process. So I've enabled it for Spring Boot Java apps in dev and RC. So next time you deploy your application in dev or RC, and if it's a Java app, it would automatically get the trace ID. So based on this trace ID right here, so from APM, you can look at the trace ID and you could take this trace ID and you can type it in the Elk and you would be able to see any logs which were in the context of this call chain. So it may show up even for, we have enabled this, we are in the process of enabling this for Nginx. So eventually we would be able to see in the Nginx calls. We should also be able to see it for the application. And tickets are also open for Golang apps. And once this gets added into common library, I saw a few of them already. I don't know how, I didn't check. Maybe it's already enabled. But once it's in the Golang library, those apps would also start getting those. And we would be able to go from RUM to APM to Elk if we need to.
Yep. Let's see. Julio asks, I've already already captured the user actions click, but not for the view load or the errors in my service. Do we require a deal to deal with those by the custom actions or call directly? I believe custom actions. I don't know. Amar, can you speak to that? You're more involved in that part of it.
I did not fully get it.
It's in the meeting chat if you want to take a look there.
Okay, I'll read it and can you go to the next something?
There's not a next question, so go ahead and read that. And
this one.
sorry, I know that the custom actions are there because the WebSocket does not just show up as a freebie. TCP sockets do, or well, the non-WebSocket stuff does. But anyway, sorry, Amar.
Yeah, maybe we can take it offline. I don't know the offhand. For both RAM and APM, we send the data to Datadog, right? When you're sending the span data to Datadog, you could also put attributes. You could put many of the attributes are added automatically. Like for example, for servlet type request, it automatically puts the status code, URL. These are all attributes. We can also add custom attributes. So for example, for a click action, you may be able to add custom action. I still don't get the question yet, and we can take it offline. So in general, you could add more attributes to an already existing call, which is already being captured, or you could create a custom action. And I can point you to the code where the custom action was added for the call pops and so on. But I have not done it myself. Somebody else did the work, and we can also get in touch with those people if you need to add custom action. So the reason I'm bringing up these custom attributes, I have seen some teams, if I'm not mistaken, maybe this one was a chat team. They were looking at the message ID, message UUID, and then using that as a key to look into different databases. So it's possible, for example, message UUID to be added as a custom attribute to conversation, to chat, to presence service. So then people would be able to even search on message ID, or they would be able to link, or they would be able to see. They would still be able to see all the things today between RAM and APM and ELK, but they won't be able to search for that particular ID. So in some cases, the issue might start by looking at some database, or somebody having a question of why the presence event didn't show up, and they want to go by the message UUID. In the Datadog, we can't search for that right now. So if you add it as a custom attribute, then we would be able to search. Yeah, I don't know if I'm answering the question, Julio, but let's talk later on.
Please ping us in the SRE general channel for any questions like that. So Julio, if you would please ask us there, then we can do the research and make sure we understand it and get you a proper answer. And then Scott says, is it possible to add custom metrics for things that aren't tied to specific requests, for example, to be able to track over time how full an internal worker pool is or something similar? Probably the answer is yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. This is a very good idea, Scott. And we have not been adding a lot of application metrics. Like I said, for Java people, APM was for free, and that captured all the timestamps. So things like, for example, how full is my connection pool? Over time, you want to see if the connection pool is running highest capacity, or there's a lot of things available. So adding metrics to Datadog is a very good thing, and it would improve not only observability, we could also alerts on those things. We can take proactive actions. So let's chat offline if you have something in mind, and kind of work it together to create a Confluence page for others to follow to add more metrics. Right now, I'm not aware of any team adding custom metrics, but it's such a good thing to do.
I believe there are a couple. And so one last thing I'll say about that is Datadog is by no means free. It actually costs quite a lot of money, but we get a lot for that. And there are a lot of things like custom metrics that we get sort of an allotment of them, and we're not really using many. So we can expand a lot of our usage here pretty extensively before we have to worry about cost savings, which is a thing. I mean, you all know the dev and RC environments currently are not actually fully tooled up because of the cost. The same is true for RUM. A lot of these events, like the call pop and the other custom metrics or events, those being added do not actually cost us any more money. So we should keep indexing on that. You might have noticed when Amar was sharing the RUM session for me, that it showed a call pop show up. It showed me, it showed the call ringing, but there was really nothing there about, did I answer the call? Did I hang up on the call? Because the call only lasted 2 seconds. That's stuff that we want to tool. And I think there's actually work already being done around that. But one of the things we're asking everybody here to think about is, what events do I actually need that can be added here rather than having to log them, so that we can actually pull them into the sort of the more richer connection between APM, RUM, all of this stuff that we just showed you today. And they can be used for investigations, as I started showing you in the earlier part of the session with the notebook stuff. But we got 1 minute left. Any last minute questions before we break here? Yeah. If not, I'll keep talking for just 1 second. So again, remember the links will be shared later on. Norma is very kindly going to put that page together for us, and we'll link to it from the Datadog page for observability. And feel free to ask us in Necessary General if you have any questions. But thank you everybody for coming. Hopefully it was somewhat interesting.